The last step in cellular respiration is the electron transport chain. I mentioned earlier, this is where we make a lot of ATP. This is where 90% of the ATP for each glucose is going to be made. Now, in the Krebs cycle, the pyruvate got moved in to the mitochondria, converted, and then torn apart. Now what we're going to do is take the materials that were made, the NADH and FADH, and use them to make more ATP. The location of where we're going to do this is the mitochondria, so all of the stuff that we've made is there, right? So the NADH and FADH is in the mitochondria, and the mitochondria is actually two membranes. So it's the bag within a bag. So if you think about like a sandwich size Ziploc bag, and then you stuff a gallon size Ziploc bag inside of it, it's going to get all, the bigger one's going to get all wrinkly. That's what's happened here. The inside membrane is all wrinkly because it's bigger than the outside one. And that is good because this inside one has lots of surface area for the electron transport chain. So the electron transport chain is going to happen along this inner membrane. And here's how it works. So the electron transport chain is a set of these protein pumps. And they're often called proton pumps. Now they're made out of proteins. So just like we saw when we looked at the different protein molecules, they have a bunch of different jobs. One of those jobs is transport. This is one of those transport jobs, to move stuff across membranes. The NADH have lots of energy, but the energy is in electrons. The electrons are going to be dropped off by the NADH and then the FADH, both. They're going to drop them off at these proton pumps. The electrons are going to transfer their energy to the pumps to turn them on. So you can see the electrons moving through these pumps and turning on the proton pumps. So what do we mean by a proton pump? Well, protons are just hydrogen ions, H+. And so the proton pumps are going to push hydrogen ions from the inside of the mitochondria to the space between the membranes. So I'm just going to show you real quick. So the hydrogen ions are here. They're going to push them from here to here. Okay? The location isn't so much the important part, it's that they're making them go to higher concentrations. So there are not a lot of the protons on this side, and there are a lot of them on this side. Thing is that when you get a lot of anything on one side of a membrane, it wants to go to the other side. When you get high concentrations of materials, they want to go from high concentration to low concentration. Kind of like if you've ever been to a concert or any crowded place. Even humans don't like to be where it's crowded, right? We move from high concentration to low concentration. We spread out. Same thing here. These hydrogens, when they get pushed to this side and they get all crowded, they want to move over to the other side where it wasn't so crowded. So what happens with the electron transport chain, those hydrogens get pushed across by the pumps, and the electrons are being pulled, not just to give their energy up, but they're being pulled actually by the oxygen down here. So that oxygen works like a magnet, so that every little bit of energy gets pulled out of the electrons. When it gets down to the end, you can see one of those hydrogens is coming in, right? When it comes to the end, those electrons, the hydrogen, and the oxygen all combine together to make water. So this is where we get the water for cellular respiration. And then the other thing that's happening down here is, like I said, all those hydrogens are trying to get spread back out. So what has happened is the electron transport chain gives them a door to do that. So this is the door that they're allowed to go out of. So they're all pushing to go through this door, but inside of this door, there's a little turnstile, a little turbine, right? So it's got basically a little rotor, a little motor in it that as the hydrogens go past, they turn it, okay? It's like a little wheel. And as they go past it, as they go running through to go to the other side, them turning that wheel provides the energy to charge the ADP into ATP. So this is how we're able to make so much ATP in the electron transport chain. All those little electrons are giving up their energy to pump hydrogen to the other side. Those hydrogen ions charge up this protein. It's actually a protein, it's an enzyme, and it uses the energy of them running through to make ATP. Okay? So the electron transport chain is going to use the NADH, FeH2, and oxygen. So there's the oxygen from our cellular respiration, right? We already used the glucose. We broke it up and chopped it into little pieces to make our NADH and FADH. And it does that in order to move those hydrogen ions to make a lot of ATP. By moving those hydrogen ions, it charges up that enzyme and it makes water. Okay. So that is cellular respiration. Right? It's those 3 steps. There is, just like with photosynthesis, there's even more detail you can go into if you want to look in your book. But for what we're doing, that is cellular respiration. And this is what your cells do all the time. If you get up and exercise, you're going to make your cells do this more. We're actually going to talk about here in a little bit what happens if you push your cells too far, because there is a point where you push your cells too far and they run out of oxygen to do the electron transport chain. The other thing I want to talk about with the electron transport chain is what can interfere with it. So you might have heard of cyanide. So we know that cyanide is a bad thing to consume, right? Why is cyanide a bad thing to consume? Probably you know it's a poison, right? It can kill you. But how can it kill you? And I'm sure you're all going, yes, I want to know. But I want to show you real quick, because now you kind of have an idea of how cellular respiration works and how this electron transport chain works. This is where cyanide works to end up poisoning people, because it doesn't take a lot. So what the cyanide does is it binds to an enzyme in the electron transport chain. So it will bind to one of these proton pumps, and what it does is it binds to it and it keeps the electrons from being able to attach. If the electrons can't attach to these, the electrons can't move through the pumps and hydrogen can't move through, right? So cyanide's going to attach somewhere along here, and it doesn't matter which one. If it attaches here, yeah, electrons can move through the first 2, but then it can't move any farther, and it actually stops up the line, and you can't pass any more electrons. If that happens, you can't pump protons, and if you can't pump protons and get them all crowded on this side, this guy over here that's making ATP doesn't have anybody to power him, right? And so it doesn't take a lot of cyanide to block these proton pumps, right? And this is how cyanide is deadly, because what it does is it basically kills cells by starving them of energy. As I mentioned in a previous lecture, we only have enough charged up ATP to last us for a couple of seconds. So if the cells slowly start having problems making ATP, they slowly will start to die because they don't have any way to make new ATP to replace the stuff that's being used. So here is cellular respiration just summed up. So you can see we've got glycolysis happening in the cytoplasm. Then we're going to move pyruvate into the mitochondria. We're going to convert that into our acetyl-CoA. We're going to make some carbon dioxide. We made some ATP over here. We're going to do the citric acid cycle, or the Krebs cycle. It's called either one, I know. And then we're going to make carbon dioxide and ATP and NADH and FADH. These guys are going to get passed down to the electron transport chain, where we're going to make water and ATP. So this whole side over here is going to happen again in the mitochondria. So is glucose the only thing we can get energy from? And the answer is no, right? Now, carbohydrates are going to be the best source of energy for us. And that's actually the first thing your body is going to break down for energy. If you look on this chart here, carbohydrates, they're going to be turned into simple sugars like glucose. So you can take starch, chop it into simple sugars, if you remember from chapter 3. So chop starch into glucose, feed it into glycolysis. It'll go through the whole process and get us the maximum amount of ATP. Take a look at the other two food molecules, because remember, nucleic acids, not a food molecule. They store genetic information, but we can get energy from fats, because we talked about that fats are an energy storing molecule, and we can get energy from proteins. We don't commonly think of them as an energy source, but we can use them. We usually use this just to get the building blocks to make proteins. But I want you to take a look at these two and see if you can tell me, can we get the same fast and maximum amount of energy out of both fats and proteins? So if we take a look at fats first, we know that fats have a lot of energy in them, right? So we can get a lot of energy out of fats. And if we take a look at the chart, these two pieces, we're going to break the fatty acids and we're going to break the glycerol. The glycerol goes in at glycolysis, so it's going to go through all of the steps. Fatty acids are going to go in down here at the acetyl-CoA. It'll go through all of the steps down here. So we're going to get a majority of the energy out of here, because most of these pieces are going to go through the whole cellular respiration process, right? Fatty acids are going to skip glycolysis, but remember, we don't make a lot of energy in glycolysis. We only get 2 ATP, so not a big loss there. But we are going to be able to get a good amount of energy, and that's why we can use fats as a good energy source. Proteins, on the other hand, aren't such a great energy source. And if we look at the places that they go in, kind of start to see why. So the carbon compounds that come out of proteins, that some of them are going to go into glycolysis. Some of them will go straight into the citric acid cycle. So we are going to get parts of cellular respiration breaking energy out of these. But this right here is the problem. The amino groups, which is actually a big section of the protein, it's going to be used in the production of tissue or excreted as waste. And the production of tissues, proteins for like making hair and skin and so forth, or you're going to excrete it, meaning it's going to leave your body as waste. So there's a big chunk of proteins that you just can't use for energy ever. So if you are, unable to eat, what order do you think these molecules will be used by your body? So if you, can't get food for whatever reason, which of these molecules in your body do you think will be used first? Which one will be used second? And which one will be used third? And the order is carbohydrates first, because they're the easiest and the fastest to get energy out of. And then fats are second. And that should make sense if you think back to chapter 3. These two are energy storage, right? And then proteins are third. And again, that should make sense because a lot of the jobs for proteins are like, they're part of our structure and things like that, right? Okay, so the last video from this chapter is going to be on what happens when you don't have oxygen around in order to break down your food.